If you grew up with Star Wars and Star Trek, you won't just stay young a lot longer, we also never fully lose that fascination for space and its endlessness, also in gaming. And in the last few years, we've had an absolute flood of new space games. So many that I completely lost track of which ones are really worth playing. And maybe that's also because space games now cover basically every genre imaginable. Well, perfect! So let's just split them into very rough categories with actual human experiences behind them, community feedback, and a little sneak peek for each one. So grab yourself a little notepad or something, there are definitely hidden gems in there. 3 contenders that are definitely worth taking a closer look. In Space Engineers you can bolt together pretty much anything you want, from a tiny shuttle to a massive destroyer, solo or multiplayer. The game doesn't aim to be 100% realistic, more like 80, 90. Also, there's an amazing community and modding scene. Nice. Somehow even nerdier and more complicated is Kerbal Space Program, both technically and psychologically. In Space Engineers you can still figure out most things by try and error, and the question is mostly, how do I build a ship that works? However, in Kerbal you ask sometimes, what was the formula for a swing-by maneuver? You actually need real orbital mechanics. But my personal favorite among these shipbuilders is clearly Cosmotier. What makes it special is that you constantly expand your ship over time, placing everything yourself, from crew quarters to cannons, while managing and optimizing resource chains. But the core mechanics are learned pretty quickly, and the amount of stuff you actually have to manage stays reasonable. Which means the Cosmotier is all about constantly improving and upgrading your ship, instead of endlessly troubleshooting sometimes very broken designs. Unlike Kerbal or Space Engineers, it's very easy to get into Cosmotier, and you happily stay for just a few more hours. In my case, over 300. And by the way, all 3 games regularly go on sale for around 5 to 15 bucks, so maybe keep them on your radar for the next summer sale or Black Friday. Maybe you want something a bit more strategic? Here we go. Annihilate the Spence is a fun and intense RTS that feels like it never gives you a single quiet moment. But somehow that also makes it weirdly relaxing, because you get used to the endless stream of enemies and your own units flooding the battlefield. The gameplay footage in the background already explains basically everything you need to know within seconds, and for 30 bucks on Steam, it's an easy recommendation if you want to dive into some massive battles for a weekend. Era 1 isn't quite as gigantic with its base building and carnage, but it's much deeper mechanically, and honestly, I fully agree with my colleagues from GameStar. Era 1 picks up right where Homeworld left off. More strategic, more modern. A bit older by now, but still incredibly engaging, is Endless Space 2. Also very strategic, but with a very different focus on map navigation. The predefined travel routes become the core gameplay mechanic, while a lot of story unfolds alongside and creates an excellent long-form experience. Because once you've explored your own system, you've only taken the very first step towards conquering the galaxy. I actually struggle a bit to categorize the next game, because FTL, Faster Than Light, first looks like a shipbuilder, but there isn't really much building involved. Instead, it's more about tactical and strategic decision-making while traveling through a randomly generated galaxy, where every single choice matters. But it's not really a classic story game either, so for me, number 4 among the best strategy games. But the absolute king for me over the last few years is a game where you don't just build up a base or a planet, but if you succeed, an entire galaxy. Stellaris can be basically described as civilization in space, except there are no turns and no romance. Instead, there's everything a science fiction fan could possibly dream of. Democratic penguins, religious autocratic mushrooms, anything is possible, even during the course of the game itself. You can peacefully manage your little empire through prosperity and diplomacy, or try to dominate the galaxy with gigantic fleets, only for every other faction to eventually unite and give you a brutal colonoscopy. The possibilities are endless, and even after 200 hours I've maybe only played 10 to 20 actual runs and still don't fully understand every mechanic. If you want strategy in space, there's simply no way around Stellaris. The third category is a quick one, because factory games usually follow a straight formula, just with slightly different economic systems, visuals and settings. Surviving Mars and PlanetCraft are very similar, the main difference being perspective. On Mars, we build our dome cities from a top-down view, whereas in PlanetCrafter, we also head out personally to explore the world ourselves. The Universum lets you guide the development of a civilization more like a god, from the Stone Age all the way to colonizing other planets. And Outworld Station only just released, but honestly it already looks really tasty. The first Steam reviews are pretty promising too, although the top-down combat system is not for everyone. If you absolutely love factory games, then all four are solid choices. But personally, I probably would save my money for one of the next titles. For the survival category, I originally only picked out 2 games, but in the end, No Man's Sky still made it to the ranking. After that disappointing, borderline scamming launch, a lot has changed, and honestly, it's definitely worth checking back in again. And congratulations on the recent Game Awards for Best Ongoing Game. By the way, 9 years ago I was already handing out this Slap in the Face award. Nice to see they didn't want to collect another one. That being said, the price tag of a hefty $60 is, if I may say so, absolutely ridiculous when you remember what complete circus has been going around at Hello Game Studios for the last few years. Alright. My blood pressure. Astroneer, another co-op classic. What starts out as a little bit of base building usually ends up with a lot of base building. And with around 2,000 active players right now, the game still remains one of the most popular survival space builders, even 7 years after release. And number 3 is a game that truly earns the survival label, Breath Edge. A lot of people describe it as the Subnautica of space. If you enjoy a bit of claustrophobia and, more importantly, a real strong story, you should absolutely book yourself a little space trip here. Though, before buying, I'd still recommend watching a review first. The game definitely feels a bit rough around the edges in some places, and some of its gameplay mechanics won't necessarily keep every player engaged. If you rather smack some enemies around and hand out a few laser shots, you maybe feel right at home with these games. Star Wars Squadrons doesn't quite make the list. Even though the core idea of the game still deserves some applause, unfortunately, player opinions paint a very different picture. Thank you, EA. And so only 2 community favorites remain tied for first place. If you like your space battles dark and splashy, go with Chorus. Here the player controls a living ship with supernatural abilities. Narratively and cinematically, it's absolutely top tier. And if you're looking for fast-paced dogfights, you definitely get your money's worth here for around $25. If you rather have a bit more RPG mixed into your combat, then Everspace 2 is probably the better choice. Open world, loot, exploration, upgrades is all there, though the story can sometimes go a little off the rails. One review from PC Games put it like this: our protagonist is a Mary Sue that can get annoying, but it also keeps the story moving. Well, if you say so. But the real classics can never truly be replaced. Wing Commander, TIE Fighter or X-Wing. And by the way, you can still get them today. Some are even available for free online or for just a couple of bucks on Steam. Great stuff. We are already on the home stretch, and there are still 2 categories left that are absolutely packed with amazing games, but especially amazing stories. Star Wars kicks things off with Jedi Fallen Order and Outlaws. One from the perspective of a Jedi, the other from the Rebels side, and both games have their strengths and weaknesses, but Fallen Order definitely has much stronger support from the player base, making it the safer pick from the franchise. Star Trek is also jumping into the race right now with a new game where you can relive and actually shape an entire series. Starship Voyager gets teleported far away and has to begin the long journey home. Will I make all the same choices as back in the TV series that used to air when 13-year-old me had just discovered illegal streaming websites? Who knows, the player alone decides. There are plenty of other Star Trek games too, but this one is obviously my personal favorite. But honestly, I probably wouldn't have put it on a list without all the nostalgia attached to it, because the game definitely has some bigger issues here and there. For example, fights are painfully boring. Those work a bit better in other community classics. Mass Effect. Although I always played part 1 with a controller because keyboard in Mass Effect, the story is one of a kind and, well, very relevant again. An AI becoming infinitely powerful and needing to be stopped before it's too late. But using that as a justification for a galaxy-wide reset, that's more than just exciting. It's something that still sticks with me years later. Rarely have story franchises had as much impact as Star Wars, Star Trek, or Mass Effect. Those were the more well-known games. Now let's move on to the others, and 2 of them are taking us away to the moon. Moonbase Alpha is definitely showing its age, but it still deserves a mention. Why? Because NASA programmed it. You can get the game online free to play. But turn on compatibility mode and get to work, scientist. Deliver Us the Moon has an atmosphere that's absolutely captivating and immersive, but towards the end the game starts lacking depth and punch. Still, it earns a place on the list thanks to its unique visuals, sound design and atmosphere. Just lower your expectations for everything else a little and it can become something really fantastic. Jump Space is a co-op game where one player acts as a captain while the others run around blasting everything in sight. The community loves it. I thought it was honestly pretty boring, but hey, this isn't just my list, it's ours, so let's move on quickly. How about Fallout, but in space? That describes the outer worlds pretty well. Once you arrive on a new planet, you quickly realize, oh boy, the big corporations have already claimed the colony for themselves. So we have to decide, do we join the capitalist circus or distribute some justice? Either way, there's no harmless or truly nice path here. Other worlds actually dares to do something bold. Respect. Starship Simulator is the only game on this list that hasn't been released yet, but there's already a playable demo available on Steam. The game hands you a Star Trek-style spaceship and then basically says, alright, have fun. Pure classic simulator energy. Though we still have to wait a little longer for the full release. And the final classic story game might actually be the best of them all, at least if you ask the countless players who said exactly that after finishing it. Because Outer Wilds does a lot of things differently. We have to figure out why a dying planetary system is collapsing. If we fail before the catastrophe happens, the day simply starts over again. And little by little, we get closer to the answer. Brilliantly done, with fantastic atmosphere and gameplay. Not every game fits neatly into categories, but those are often the best ones. EVE Online doesn't really need an introduction for gamers anymore. It's basically everything all at once in one MMO. It's the World of Warcraft of space games and hopefully will stay around for a very long time. And by the way, it's never too late to start playing, you just need a little introduction and a lot of YouTube tutorials. In Hard Space Shipbreaker, we really get down to business with one activity, scrapping ships. For many people that sounds boring, but if you enjoy physics-based, calm space work with lots of little gameplay gimmicks in between, this is exactly where you belong. Want some retro-style tactical gameplay? Then definitely check out Cobalt Core. Beneath the small-scale gameplay there's also a small story, but the main focus is making the right decisions on the battlefield. For that we use action cards inspired by games like Hearthstone or Gwent from The Witcher. Something completely different is offered by Heavenly Bodies, where physics itself is your main enemy. One level builds on the next, and with very little assistance, you mostly stumble through hilariously chaotic attempts at expanding and repairing a space station. It's genuinely fun, but you should absolutely play it with a controller. And when this first released, the hype was absolutely insane, and honestly, the hype never fully disappeared, even 15 years later. Anyone wanting to play what might be the best MMORPG of all time simply can't avoid Star Wars: The Old Republic. It completely hooked me back then, and even today the developers still keep adding cool new content. Definitely worth checking out. But this list wouldn't be complete without the 2 biggest space games when it comes to flying, exploration and fighting. From Germany, X4 Foundations, or from England, Elite Dangerous. The big difference, X4 is single player, Elite is multiplayer in our actual Milky Way. So personally, I would jump into Elite Dangerous every now and then, but I can only recommend it to people with a high stress tolerance. At this point, it's rather a toxic relationship between me and the game. My video about it on the end card if you want, because usually I analyze games and their history. But for that, you first need a good overview. And now, we've got one. Oh, and here are the games that quite didn't make the cut. Starfield. Oh. Citizens, Star Citizen. Oh. Okay, Battlefield Gothic Armada 2. That's actually pretty. Dead Space. Oh. Empire at War. Directive 8020. Destiny. Alien Isolation. Citizen Sleeper. Starship Troopers, one of the best. The Last Starship was actually a very good time. Helldivers, I played